If you are over 65, then you probably can remember hearing the news on November 20, 1963, that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, by a lone shooter named Lee Harvey Oswald.
Such a shocking moment in history.
Absolutely. And in the 6 decades since that infamous date, many Americans have speculated that there were possible multiple conspiracies that contributed to the assassination, that it involved other shooters and various motivations.
The questions just haven't gone away.
Our presentation today will attempt to gather all pertinent information, including the large material released recently by President Trump, and try to determine who actually killed JFK. Okay, so let's dive deep into the sources you've provided regarding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Yeah, this is, such a huge topic, so much history, official reports, but also just persistent questions.
Right.
Our mission today is really to sift through the material you shared, articles, research, transcripts, and pull out the key pieces, help you get a handle on the core information and this ongoing debate.
And it is ongoing. The historical significance is just immense, obviously. But it's really that enduring public skepticism, I think, that keeps fueling the interest, keeps people searching, even now with these newer document releases.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start where the official story begins, according to your sources. The Warren Commission findings.
Okay.
This commission, it was set up pretty fast, wasn't it? By LBJ, November 29, 1963, just a week later.
Very fast. And sources mentioned that Jack Ruby killing Oswald right there on live TV. Well, that definitely kicked things into high gear. Public doubt just exploded.
Understandably. So the goal partly was to kind of calm things down, quell those conspiracy fears. Sources mentioned worries about, communist plots or maybe right-wing elements, things that could escalate.
Exactly. And President Johnson reportedly really leaned on Chief Justice Earl Warren to lead it. Kind of framed it as, serving America by getting a definitive story out there and quickly.
So what was that definitive story? What was the commission's core conclusion based on the sources?
Well, their report came out September 64, and it was very clear. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and without advice or assistance. Full stop. They said he fired the shots that killed Kennedy and wounded Governor Connally.
Alone.
And they stated they found no credible evidence, that was their phrase, of any conspiracy, domestic or foreign, involving Oswald or Jack Ruby either.
And the sources say they built that case largely on ballistics, right?
Very much so. That rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, found up on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, that was crucial.
Okay.
A bullet from Connally's stretcher, fragments from the limo, they matched them forensically to that rifle. And they found 3 spent cartridges right there near the window on the 6th floor. Pretty compelling stuff on the surface.
And what about eyewitnesses? Did the sources mention testimony supporting this?
Oh yeah, the commission heard from hundreds. I think the number was 552 witnesses. And several did report seeing a rifle being fired from that 6th floor window or seeing a rifle there right after the shots. Howard Brennan, specifically, was across the street. He described seeing a slender man aiming deliberately from that corner window. And then there was Patrolman Marion Baker encountering Oswald inside the building on the 2nd floor just moments after the shots. The building superintendent confirmed Oswald worked there.
And Oswald was later linked to shooting Officer Tippit, too.
Right. Sources say 9 witnesses identified Oswald as the man who shot Dallas Patrolman J.D. Tippit shortly after the assassination. So you see how the pieces fit together for the official narrative.
Okay, so that's the official account. But as we know, it didn't exactly put the matter to rest for everyone. What did the sources say started fueling that skepticism almost immediately?
Well, a few things. As noted in the sources, the sheer speed of the commission's creation and that very explicit goal, shut down conspiracy talk for national security reasons that made some people suspicious right away.
Like maybe the conclusion was predetermined.
Kind of, or at least that the goal might have influenced how they looked at the evidence, what questions they asked or didn't ask. It definitely contributed to the public doubt that just wouldn't go away.
And Oswald himself, the sources mention he wasn't exactly unknown to the government before November 63, right?
No, not at all. That's a huge point in the sources. His background, defecting to the Soviet Union, coming back, his self-described Marxism, his contacts with Soviet and Cuban consulates.
So the CIA, the FBI, they knew about him.
They did. And sources really question why they didn't act more on what they knew. There's this fascinating detail in one source out of about 130 people who came back from the USSR in 1962. Oswald was apparently one of only 3 who weren't thoroughly debriefed by the government that year.
Huh. That does seem odd.
Highly unusual, yeah. It just adds to the questions surrounding him.
Which then brings us to Jack Ruby. His role is just impossible to ignore in the sources, isn't it? Killing Oswald live on TV.
I mean, talk about fueling speculation. It was immediate.
And the sources highlight his known connections, right? Ties to organized crime figures.
And he just walked into the police station.
Apparently so. Sources say he was known to the Dallas police, was able to just kind of saunter right in, and then later, after he's charged, he reportedly asks the Warren Commission to take him to D.C., says he wants to tell the truth, but claims he can't tell it here. I have been used for a purpose. Very dramatic.
Wow. And there were darker rumors, too, about people connected to him being silenced.
Yeah, sources mention reports about some of his strippers maybe being paid off or meeting bad ends. Betty Mooney McDonald is named reportedly killed before she could testify about Ruby. Adds another layer of shadow to it all.
So the official report lands, but you've got the commission's perceived mandate, Oswald's strange background, Ruby's unbelievable actions. The skepticism wasn't going anywhere. Not at all. And what's really striking, as noted across the sources, is how many serious academics and historians have criticized the Warren Report over the years. That persistent dissatisfaction, it really kept the door wide open for other possibilities, other investigations.
So let's talk about those other possibilities. The sources you provided definitely delve into alternative theories and potential players beyond just Oswald.
Right. And one major group that comes up consistently in the sources is organized crime. The Mafia.
Motive seems clear there, based on the sources.
Extremely clear. The Kennedy administration, especially Robert Kennedy as Attorney General, was cracking down hard on the mob. Sources name specific figures like Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, Jimmy Hoffa, alleging they might have ordered the hit out of anger and self-preservation.
And there was evidence they were happy about Kennedy's death.
Sources mention surveillance picked up mafia leaders basically celebrating after the assassination. Also, there's the Cuba angle. The mob lost millions, hotels, casinos when Castro took over. And they apparently blamed Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs failure didn't oust Castro.
But did the official investigations find the Mafia as a group was involved?
No, that's key. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, the HSCA, later concluded the Mafia as an organization wasn't involved. But, and this is a big but, in the sources, they explicitly did not rule out individual mob members participating.
And Ruby's connections fit right into that, don't they?
Perfectly. His known ties to underworld figures like Joe Campisi, who's mentioned, it just fuels that suspicion, according to the sources.
Okay, what about the intelligence community? The CIA and anti-Castro groups get mentioned a lot in the sources too.
Yeah, there's this whole complicated nexus described. One source calls it a strange union element of the CIA, anti-Castro Cuban refugees who were furious with Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs, and organized crime figures like Sam Giancana and Johnny Rosdelli.
Going together.
On plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. Operations like Mongoose, ZR Rifle. Sources mention William King Harvey, a big CIA name, head of this ZR Rifle group, described basically as a global assassination unit meeting with mob guys to discuss executive action, which was code for assassination against Castro.
Wow, so these groups were involved in assassination plots. Just not necessarily this one.
According to the HSCA findings mentioned in the sources, yes, like the Mafia, they concluded these groups as groups weren't involved in the JFK assassination. But again, they couldn't preclude individual members acting on their own, and Oswald's own confusing links to both pro and anti-Castro figures that just keeps things murky.
And the sources mentioned LBJ briefly.
Yes, one source touches on a theory involving LBJ, but it also stresses, importantly, the need for really critical evaluation and solid proof when you're talking about claims that explosive, like alleged recordings. It's presented as a theory, not endorsed.
Got it. So we have these powerful groups, Mafia, CIA elements, anti-Castro Cubans with strong motives, some history of plotting together. But the official inquiries found no group conspiracy in Dallas, just maybe individuals.
That's the complex picture painted by the sources, yeah. Lots of smoke, intercepting interest, but no definitive fire found by the official bodies connecting these groups organizationally to the assassination itself. It leaves a lot of gray area.
And then you have individuals who, according to your sources, actually claim they were involved. Let's talk about James Files.
Right, James Files. Sources describe him as a prisoner who, way back in 1994, confessed. Said he was the shooter on the grassy knoll.
The grassy knoll shooter claimed he fired the fatal shot.
Yep, the fatal shot to JFK's right temple. He claimed he was hired by Charles Nicoletti, who was linked to mob boss Sam Giancana, and worked with Johnny Roselli, another mob figure involved in those Castro plots.
His motive, or the mob's motive, according to him.
Files reportedly tied it back to the mafia being furious with the Kennedys and also linked it to their involvement with the CIA and the anti-Castro stuff. Like, it was all connected.
Did he mention Oswald?
He did. Claimed Oswald was actually with him for a few days before the assassination, out in Mesquite, Texas, helping calibrate weapons. Said Oswald knew who he was, but also insisted Oswald wasn't the killing type and definitely wasn't the shooter in Dealey Plaza.
With a very detailed confession, he described the shot itself.
Yeah. Described firing from the grassy knoll, aiming for the right eye temple area, firing at the same time as Nicoletti, who he claimed was also shooting, and said his shot caused the president's head to snap back. Mentioned using a specific weapon, a fireball pistol hidden in a briefcase.
How credible is this? Do the sources raise doubts?
Oh, absolutely. Significant doubts. Critiques mentioned in the sources point to a lack of proof for his claimed military background, 82nd Airborne Laos Cambodia stuff. And inconsistencies, like his claims about who was on the grassy knoll don't match photos, people he named like Frank Sturgis, Eugene Brading, even Jack Ruby. Photographic evidence suggests they weren't there. Another source, reviewing a book about files, points out contradictions within his own story timelines that don't quite add up. Details about the motorcade route differing from known facts, seeing Ruby where no one else reported him. The review basically suggests it might sound too neat, too scripted, maybe cooked up in prison for attention, or maybe even protection.
So a dramatic story, but questionable reliability based on the material.
Very much so. The sources present it, but also give strong reasons to be skeptical.
And what about the other name mentioned, Chauncey Holt?
Holt's story is different. Sources link him to mob figures early on, Peter Licavoli, Meyer Lansky, but also later to CIA activities. Specifically, planning for Operation Mongoose, working alongside those same names. William King Harvey, Giancana Rosselli.
Okay, so involved in those Castro plots again, was he in Dallas?
Sources say yes, he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. And apparently, he got a letter afterwards from mob boss Licavoli wishing him a better 1964 than 1963, which made Holt nervous because Licavoli knew he'd been in Dallas.
So what did Holt do?
He reportedly contacted Joseph Ball, an attorney who worked with the Warren Commission, told him his story, insisted he had nothing to do with the assassination itself. But according to Holt's account in the source, Ball seemed uninterested, allegedly saying the commission's sole purpose was just to prove Oswald did it alone.
That reinforces the skepticism about the commission's predetermined goal, if true.
It does fit that narrative, yeah. But again, like Files, Holt's story adds another layer, but verification is tough. These confessions are compelling, but fraught with issues, as the sources make clear.
Let's shift then to the physical evidence, which you'd think would be clear, but the sources suggest it's just as debated, right?
If not more so, honestly. The medical evidence, the ballistics, huge points of contention.
Let's start with the autopsy. The sources raise serious questions about the one done at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
They really do. Discrepancies are highlighted. For instance, 2 FBI agents who were actually present at the autopsy reportedly saw the entry wound differently than the final report described it.
How so?
They apparently described it as being high in the back, kind of central but towards the right, about 5.5 inches below the collar. They insisted there was no entry wound in the neck initially.
But the official report put the entry wound lower, in the neck back area, exiting the throat.
Exactly, which allowed for the single bullet theory. The autopsy doctors later said they didn't see the throat wound clearly because of the emergency tracheotomy done in Dallas. But one source finds it really strange that these 2 FBI agents, with their conflicting observation, apparently never testified before the Warren Commission.
Suggesting maybe the commission didn't want to hear things that contradicted the lone gunman, shots from behind theory.
That's the implication raised in the source, yeah. It fuels the idea they might have steered away from inconvenient evidence.
What else about the autopsy was questioned in the sources?
Well, the state of the head wound is discussed. Witnesses describe significant damage to the back of the head, brain matter, skull blown outwards. Jackie Kennedy crawling onto the trunk is often cited. James Files, in his account, claimed he saw this through his scope from the knoll.
And issues with the brain itself.
Yes. A forensic pathologist examining materials years later, in 1972, reportedly found the president's brain was missing from the archives. He also questioned the recorded weight, 1,500 grams, which seemed high even for an adult male brain that had lost matter compared to a typical 1,350, 1,400 grams.
Why was it so high? Or why the discrepancy?
Unclear from the source, it just struck him as odd. He also noted standard forensic procedures like making serial coronal sections of the brain weren't done. The reason given was supposedly to preserve the specimen, which he found unusual. All these points just add to the uncertainty around the primary medical evidence.
Leads directly to the single bullet theory or the magic bullet. The sources seem pretty critical of that.
Extremely critical. It's often framed as something Arlen Specter, a commission lawyer, essentially had to construct to make the lone gunman scenario work with the timing and the wounds.
Remind us what it proposes again.
It posits that one single bullet, fired from the depository, entered Kennedy's upper back lower neck, exited his throat, then went on to hit Governor Connolly, breaking ribs, shattering his radius bone, causing multiple complex wounds.
And then the bullet was found.
On Connolly's stretcher at Parkland Hospital, in remarkably good condition, pristine is the word often used, almost undamaged despite causing all that havoc. Sources just call the whole theory totally absurd, nonsense. How could one bullet do all that and look like that? It's a central point of disbelief for critics.
And the location of the shots, where did people think they came from?
Huge disagreement there. The Warren Commission, of course, pinned it all on the depository, but sources consistently state that a large majority of bystanders in Dealey Plaza, maybe over 75%, reported hearing shots from the grassy knoll area, in front or to the side of the limo.
Not from behind.
Some heard shots from both directions, adding to the confusion. Forensic analysis discussed in the sources gets technical. One analysis suggests the fatal headshot trajectory cone points away from the grassy knoll for that specific shot, but doesn't rule out other frontal locations.
But other sources mention witnesses on the knoll.
Yes, witnesses near the knoll who claim they saw shots fired from there, some even saying they were told later to change their stories. There's also that account of a Dallas deputy encountering a man near the picket fence showing Secret Service ID who told him basically, "Nothing to see here, keep moving."
And other potential shooter locations mentioned.
One source details expert analysis suggesting multiple shooters could have triangulated fire, potentially involving the knoll, maybe the Daltex building across the street. It also notes the depository shot itself was quite difficult, moving target, angle, distance. Closer shots might have been easier.
So the physical evidence and witness accounts, far from settling things, seem to just deepen the mystery and support the possibility of multiple shooters from different spots.
That's definitely the impression given across these sources. The evidence is contradictory, contested, and open to vastly different interpretations.
Okay, let's pivot to the more recent developments the document releases mandated under President Trump. Did they finally provide answers, according to your sources?
Well, the sources break down what these documents did and didn't reveal.
What did they show?
They definitely provided enhanced clarity, as one source put it, on CIA operations during the Cold War, especially 46 to 65. Lots of detail on Latin America funding political parties, meddling in elections like in Bolivia.
So insights into CIA tradecraft.
Exactly. Specifics about the Mexico City station, counterespionage like breaking into the French embassy in D.C., methods like fluoroscopic scanning for bugs, tagging phone boxes, spy stuff. Also, contacts between the DCI, the head of the CIA, and Popes John XXIII and Paul VI dealings noted as potentially raising eyebrows.
Anything specific to the assassination timeframe?
Yes, previously blacked out info from LBJ's daily intelligence checklists right after the assassination, and crucially, more details on Oswald's trip to Mexico City shortly before the assassination, confirming the CIA and FBI knew even more about him beforehand than they had admitted.
Knew how much more, as one source put it. But the big question, did they connect any of this to a JFK conspiracy?
And that's the key takeaway from multiple sources. No. Despite tens of thousands of pages, though some were duplicates, the documents released so far apparently do not contain that smoking gun. They don't point to a conspiracy directly involving JFK's assassination or Oswald's role in one.
So, historians quoted basically said
That while the docs are valuable for understanding the Cold War CIA, they don't fundamentally change the assassination narrative itself. One source summed it up bluntly. File dump shows an underground CIA operation, but no connection to JFK and Oswald.
Were there any problems with the release itself?
Yes, sources mention some significant issues. Inadvertently, personal information social security numbers of living former informants from the 60s and 70s got released. A major breach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the White House reportedly had to scramble to offer help like credit monitoring. And the sheer speed of review was questioned, trying to vet 60,000 pages in just 24 hours for one final batch. Seemed unrealistic to some, observers cited.
So, valuable context on spying, more on what agencies knew about Oswald.
Yeah,
But no conspiracy confirmed in these files, according to the sources.
that seems to be the consensus presented in the material you shared, yes. No definitive answer there.
Which brings us back really to why this all remains so debated. Why does the mystery endure after 6 decades and all this information?
The sources touch on a few core reasons, I think.
One seems almost psychological, the imbalance.
Right. One source highlights that deep-seated feeling many have. How could someone as significant as JFK, a symbol of Camelot, be brought down by, as the source puts it, an insignificant schlup like Oswald? It just doesn't compute for many people. There must be more to it.
And the nature of belief itself plays a role.
Yeah. Another source talks about how belief in conspiracy theories can become almost tribal. People get so invested in their particular theory, they might not engage with evidence that contradicts it, or even listen to non-conspiracy views. That source found it frustrating, even calling it potentially dangerous stuff.
And just the lingering unknowns about key people.
Absolutely. Despite everything, figures like Jack Ruby, his real motives, Oswald, his actual activities, especially in Mexico City, and these claimants like Holt and Files, their stories remain debated, contested, unresolved within the sources.
So how do we reconcile it all? The official story, the witnesses pointing elsewhere, the questions about the autopsy and the bullet, the confessions, the new documents that reveal spy games, but no plot. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and that really raises the final question, doesn't it? Even with all this material, these massive document dumps, are we actually any closer to a universally accepted truth about Dallas? Or does every new piece of information, every new analysis from sources like these just open up more questions, more possibilities? Does it just make the puzzle bigger?
It certainly feels that way sometimes. We've definitely covered a huge amount today, pulling all these different threads from the sources you provided, the official reports, the doubts, the theories, the claims, the evidence debates, the document findings. It is absolutely clear why the questions around November 22nd, 1963 still resonate so strongly after all this time. Please share any thoughts you have in the comments below. And please subscribe to our channel to receive future video notifications. Thank you for listening.